Lawyer Show. My name is Jeremy Rosenthal, and I am your lawyer. My co-counsel today is Ann Badmus. Just to acquaint you with the Lawyer Show, for those of you who are not already aware, and chances are you're not, about the Lawyer Show, we are, in many ways, we are a cornerstone of bringing legal knowledge and power and education to everybody. This is a show of lawyers, by lawyers, for lawyers. Last week, I think I described it as the Sesame Street of lawyers, and that's kind of what I'd like to do and kind of how I'd like this thing to be, because I do want to, I want the goal for the Lawyer Show, frankly, is to keep me off the streets. That's number one. Number two is I haven't been in trial for a year. And for that reason, because of the pandemic, I've been chewing on my fingernails. I've been picking up other bad habits, most of which we can't really talk about here. And I find that by doing this podcast, even if nobody watches, by doing this podcast, it's at least curbed some of my bad behaviors and some of my bad habits. This has been very cathartic for me. I'm a criminal lawyer, and to me, there's only so many times you can hear people talk about drugs or money or violence or sex, right? And sometimes you just have to have a hankering for, well, let's dig into what footnote 42 says, right? Let's do what we always, why we went to law school, so we can nerd out on the book stuff. And so on the Lawyer Show, on the Sesame Street of legal podcasting that nobody probably watches, I like to talk to just as many different lawyers as I can that don't do what I do, because I find what I do, well, I do it enough, right? And to me, it's interesting, I suppose. But I find these types of things more interesting. And today, we've got a guest, Ann Badmus, who is, she's a lawyer and she practices in immigration law. And Ann is, there's very few topics that are as hot consistently as immigration law, and that are as rapidly changing as immigration law. And we're even, for better or worse, blessed with some current events about immigration that we'll probably get into. I told Ann that we would bring her on the Lawyer Show and she would get to talk a lot about herself, and so she's still probably sitting here wondering when that's going to be. And the answer for Ann is it's going to be right about now. So Ann, introduce yourself to Lawyer Show Nation.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you for inviting me onto the Lawyer Show. I'm very happy to be here. As Jeremy said, I am an immigration attorney, and I am the managing attorney of Badmus Associates. We are a firm out in Dallas. However, we practice immigration law nationwide. The interesting thing about immigration is that it is a federal law practice, so no matter where our clients are, we usually can help them, even though we're situated in Dallas. So I have been practicing immigration law for about 25, I'm going to date myself, but about 30 years that I practice immigration law. So I've seen a lot of changes, and I've seen a lot of things stay the same. So I'm really excited to talk about what we're seeing today and kind of help, of course, to educate people on what's going on with immigration now. So thank you again, Jeremy, for having me.
One of the interesting things I saw, I was doing a little bit of research on you, if you don't mind, some trolling. These days, it used to be where if I had like private pictures, private life things, private anything, I would be offended if other people were like trying to watch that thing. Now I'm like offending people if I don't go on their social media and look at all their pictures, right, and all that stuff. I saw that you went to law school in Delaware.
Yes.
That just is that is an interesting place to me for many reasons, not the least of which is going to law school there has to be pretty interesting. What I don't think a lot of folks understand, probably not a lot of our audience understands, is a lot of law is structured around the state of Delaware with corporations. Did you always want to do immigration? Did you talk about law school? Talk about what you wanted to do. Did you want to do something with corporations? Are you from Delaware and escaped? Talk about all that.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, actually, I kind of have to start back with my undergrad, which was the University of Delaware. So that's actually how I got to Delaware. I grew up in North Carolina, so I ended up going to engineering school at the University of Delaware, and I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering and started to work in that area and decided maybe I didn't want to do that forever. So I decided to go to law school, and Delaware only has one law school.
Mm-hmm.
It was at that time, well, actually, it was Delaware Law School. It became part of Widener University, which is a school out of Pennsylvania, which has two law school campuses, one in Harrisburg and one in Delaware. And I think they just in the past couple of years, they changed the name back to Delaware Law School, but it's still part of Widener University. So I attended law school at night while I was still working as an engineer. And you're right, Delaware was a corporate capital. I imagine it still is for corporate law. And so when in my last year of law school, I changed jobs and became a law clerk with a corporate law firm in Delaware, and actually did a lot of corporate law for about 5 years after that. So I really had no idea about being an immigration attorney. And in fact, that wasn't something at that time that we even had, any courses in. Never really talked about it. Now I see, I get a lot of applications from attorneys who are, attorneys who want to be hired have actually, interested in immigration law, actually have had immigration law classes or even clinics and that. So that's a big change from when I went to school. But I actually became interested in immigration law after, while I was working with the corporate law firm, and decided to start on my own. So after about 5 years of being there, I decided to start my own practice. And in Delaware, very small state, very small bar, not that many attorneys there. And so there really wasn't any immigration attorney actually practicing in the whole state. And so that was one of the areas I thought, well, maybe I'll do that and have a little corner on the market since
Mm-hmm.
I would be the only one practicing. And that really did help quite a bit. I've got a lot of referrals from other attorneys in Delaware who, didn't practice that area. I did other practice areas as well, still continue with a little bit of corporate, and also did, I think, real estate as well. But I decided when we decided to move to Texas, which was about 5 years later in 1998, I really liked the immigration practice, and I decided just to focus on that. That would be the easiest way to transition to practicing in Texas without having to, start all over in terms of learning Texas law for other practice areas. So it pretty much has been my focus since that time.
That's a really interesting thing that a way of kind of looking at it to corner the market, because you do a lot of, and tell me if I'm wrong, because you do a lot of what I would characterize as corporate immigration, and
Yes.
Delaware, you don't have probably the same type of border issues that you have in Texas, although you have Pennsylvania right there, and we know to keep them out, right? And but in Delaware, and the way to kind of step this back for everybody who's watching who didn't go to law school. Of the 5 viewers that we have right now, or 3 viewers or 2 viewers, however many, one of you maybe didn't go to law school. So every corporation, this is one of the things that I slept through corporate law. I do remember this, is that every corporation is registered in 2 places. You have 2 homes, right? One is wherever your home state is, and you can pick any state, I think. But everybody picks Delaware because Delaware has just basically said, we're going to make our state the breeding ground for corporations. We're going to make the laws easier here. We're going to give the most benefits for taxes and all that stuff. And so a lot of your major corporations are incorporated in Texas and Delaware, or New York and Delaware, or California and Delaware. And then to say, all right, I'm going to do immigration and corner the market in a state like Delaware is actually, to me, that's pretty crafty that you did that. And it sounds like it worked out pretty well for you, and still kind of does in that same vein.
Yes, yeah, I would agree. Certainly, as I mentioned, I practice corporate law. It was great, but I really wanted something that was more, I guess, focused on helping individuals as well as businesses, but mainly with individuals. So I really felt that that was a good way of doing that. And I did have some interest personally as well because I had a lot of friends who were immigrants. I also had my husband who was an immigrant from Nigeria. So I had a little bit of experience going through that process with him. And so I thought, well, this could be a great way, to do something that I really wanted to do. And I ended up loving it a lot. So I'm very happy I went that route.
And and you must have some need in your life too, because you must hate certainty, because as a mechanical engineer, you're dealing with math and physics and you get definite answers to things. But you probably took a step back and you were like, you know what? I need to have a bunch of maybes here, right? Like I want these things are these answers are far too concrete for me, right? That's
exactly.
just a very different, radically different areas that you sort of migrated through. Pardon the pun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yes. I mean, engineering is definitely, I mean, there's some creativity there, certainly, but it just ended up that I really wanted something a little different. And yeah, there are a lot of maybes in law altogether, and certainly in immigration law, there's a lot of that.
You are watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew network. You can see JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is the Lawyer Show. We're on between noon and 1. I am your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. My co-counsel today is immigration attorney Ann Badmus. Talk about corporate immigration, because I kind of mentioned that and I kind of brought that up. And on you handle, and I know you have worked in the past in the medical field with physicians, helping medical professionals emigrate, and talk about what the difference is between, say, and I may be using a word that's probably not perfect, but talk about the difference between, or what corporate immigration is relative to what everybody typically thinks of immigration, right?
Sure. Yeah, because a lot of people, as you mentioned, immigration is always in the news. You always hear about immigration in one way or the other, but the area of practice that I will focus in isn't something you typically hear. For those who are very interested, you might find some news stories here and there if you're really searching for them, but it's not something you normally see on the 6 o'clock news about that. Mm-hmm. So corporate immigration is really, or sometimes I call it business immigration. It really is related to our immigration law. We have very limited immigration laws that allow people to immigrate. So there's not a whole lot of ways people can do that. But one of those ways is through either business or through employment. Business would be in the sense of someone who is a business person who wants to start up a business, and there are some ways for them to do that, to come to the U.S. and start a business and become employers. Mm-hmm. But employment immigration by far is the largest part of that, where companies are hiring foreign nationals for their skills, and they have to go through a process to get those individuals to be legally authorized to work. So as you mentioned, a lot of what we do is working with professionals like physicians and other medical professionals. And usually they are, for the medical side, they usually, especially physicians, have gone through medical school in their countries. So they have their MDs, or the equivalent of MDs, and they come here to do their residency training, which all doctors are required to do in the United States. So they'll get their degrees, they are accepted into training programs in the US, and then after they've completed their training, they're eligible.
I can't hear her.
For license. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
It seemed like I was. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I'm not sure where it kind of froze up, but as I was saying, is that for those physicians who have foreign physicians who have come here and done their training and they're ready to get their medical license but in addition to their medical license, they also need to have the immigration permission, which is what we call visas, for them to work here. So I help with the medical practices, the hospitals or who are hiring these physicians and helping to make sure that they have the proper work authorization, and eventually helping those physicians to get permanent residence, the green card, as many people know it, and citizenship.
What types of flies in the ointment do you typically run into with trying to bring over folks that fit this categorization? What types of issues do you run into, and what would you characterize as headaches or problems or other issues in trying to get folks over here?
Yeah, so mainly, most of the time, the individuals are here in the US in some other visa status. So, as I mentioned, the doctors have come here and are working here or getting trained here through a specific type of visa. And then you also have like foreign students, and the universities have many of them quite a large population of foreign students who are getting their education here, and then afterwards half of them usually want to stay and try to work and get employment. So one thing that you find what the requirements are, and kind of a little bit hesitant about, this sounds pretty complicated. How can we do this? Is this legal kind of situation? So that's a hiccup that, for the clients who are looking physicians in order to be able to stay here, oftentimes I will have to really kind of, of course, explain to the employers what's involved and assure them that it is a legal process. However, they always have to know that there is no 100% guarantee, just like in any other, legal case, that they will, get that visa. But the majority of the time, we're of course qualifying those individuals and making sure that we have the correct evidence to prove their qualifications so that they do get it. But I will say in the past 4 years or so, it has been a lot more difficult, not only for my practice, but for immigration attorneys who are also practicing this area, because we've had a lot of changes that weren't necessarily through Congress, but through the administration of these visa rules that we had been used to, and all of a sudden they were changed up. And so there was a lot of issues in that sense. That's kind of changing now, but essentially it had been a whole lot harder for employers and their foreign national employees to get through that process.
There's a really good friend of mine. I say he's a really good friend. He was a good friend of mine. We just lose touch, right? I mean, I do fire people as friends. Now I'm getting off in the weeds here. A friend of mine who practiced immigration law basically said the joke was that amongst immigration lawyers is you never buy like a treatise or books, or you just don't bother, because they're going to be out of date by the time that you get them, right? And so the nature with immigration, that's just the nature of how it is. I mean, it is, and tell me if I'm wrong, immigration is now, has always been, and will always be a political football. I mean, right?
As long as I've been practicing, yeah, it has been, definitely.
And so for that reason, the only thing that stays the same seems to be the change, right? And all the and the upheaval. And so it is, again, just always going to be, for whatever reason, it's a political flashpoint, and it's the politicians that are making executive orders. Congress is acting. I mean, these are elected officials, right? And so it stands to reason that that's why immigration is such a white hot area, and just there's so much upheaval that seems to be constant with it.
Yes.
Is there do you work too with the families of the individuals who are coming over? So so I say coming over, somebody who's working here, somebody who you are trying to get to stay here for a job. Are these people who typically have families with them already, and that they need to also be naturalized as well? And if so, are you able to kind of help everybody, or how does that work?
Sure. Yes. So most of the time, yes. If the clients have, either a spouse and children that also need assistance. Now, many of them many of them are born in the U.S., so they don't necessarily they don't have to have anything done with regard to their status. But usually it's at least a spouse, and sometimes if they're older children that had come and immigrated with their parents. So immigration rules are very specific as to who qualifies as a family member in those circumstances. So if we're looking at the business or employment side, where let's say I have a client who's a doctor who has, a spouse and children that need immigration. So usually based on his or her status, they are able to get a visa in order to be, together as a family unit. And then eventually applying for permanent status, like for a green card, they are able to also, be part of that and get their green card or permanent status along with that worker. Now, when it comes to citizenship, that's an individual matter. So if a spouse doesn't want to become a citizen, they don't have to, but the other spouse can. So those are individual applications. But for children, it is important to understand there's an age limit on children. So basically for a child of someone, a worker, to actually get status through their parent, they would have to be 21, under the age of 21. So oftentimes once they turn 21, if they haven't gotten a green card by that time, they may be out of luck. They may actually have to either leave or find some other way to actually, maintain legal status in the U.S.
Other than healthcare, what are some of the other bigger sectors that are kind of involved with business immigration? What other areas of the economy do you see that there's this type of bulk work? I hesitate to call it that, but this type of okay, we have these folks that we just kind of need this block of people to come and work for us. What other areas are there?
Yeah, so in my practice, the main areas I see are, I guess, what we call STEM fields, information technology, the IT industry, and that's, I guess, a lot of people probably know that there's a lot of foreign national workers in that field, as well as engineering. A lot of, especially coming out of our universities, I think that I saw some statistically, there's about a third of the students on the master's degree level, or maybe even higher, that are foreign nationals in engineering and a lot of those technical fields as well. So we see a lot of that, in particular companies who are hiring, from schools, entry level or at least master's degree level, coming from there. And then of course, industries like the hospitality, restaurants, hospitality, I guess, restaurants or whatever, hotels, that sort of thing, and then a construction. So those are the areas that we see a larger percentage of foreign-born workers there. With the STEM fields and, medical, those are a lot easier to get legal status and to eventually become, permanent residents and citizens. With construction and some of the industries where the skill level isn't necessarily that high, or you don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree to fulfill those positions, it is a lot more difficult, and in many cases almost impossible to get any kind of legal status through those industries.
Something that's kind of interesting is that criminal law, there are certain areas where we have a fair degree of crossover practice, meaning that in the criminal world, we'll deal a lot with family lawyers from time to time. We will deal with, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, what other kind of attorneys we may deal with. We may deal with insurance attorneys if there is, say, a hit and run that turns criminal. But a very, very common area for us is immigration. That is probably the most common crossover area. In a business context, I don't know that you see much of it. We have, and you may or may not be aware, but in criminal law, we often very much do work hand in hand with immigration counsel. And I've had and I want to kind of bounce a couple things off you here, because I've had things like this that are very similar that have happened to us. And so, for instance, let's say there is the spouse of somebody who works for an IT company or something like that, and the spouse is here from they're a foreign national and they're here, and they went through it. The companies sort of directed them on the immigration front. And they don't want the company to know that the wife got arrested for something, right? But that's a very real threat to her ability to stay here, and I guess I'm assuming by extension probably her family's ability as well, or her family's will to be here. Do you deal much with how much of the criminal? How much of criminal stuff do you see? Does it creep into the things that you do? And do you see issues like that?
Sure. I won't say I see it a whole lot, but yes, over the years I have seen it even in the type of work that I do. As you mentioned, there usually is at some point, some people, not usually, but some people, even the individual worker themselves, may have an issue, like, for example, a DUI. That could happen, or their spouse or even their child, might have an issue. So we have seen that as well. And so usually, I always tell my clients, if anything like that happens, you certainly need to consider not only the criminal, defense part of it, but the immigration part of it as well. And we have worked with the criminal defense attorneys, just to figure out, if we're going to plea bargain, or if we're, what do we want to do to make sure that it's not going to have an impact on their ability to immigrate or stay in the United States at that point. So yes, I do run across that, even, with the professional levels that I work with. You do see that. And also sometimes we'll get clients who do come to me that have already had in their history that kind of issue. And it may not have impacted their temporary stay, but in the future, for permanent residents, it could be an issue as well. So we always do screen for, no matter, what profession they're in. That is one of the questions we always have to ask. Have there been any arrest, any, criminal record? So that we can be sure that we address those things. And even after someone gets their green card, let's say they never had any issues previously, and but after they got permanent residence, then maybe there's DUI or some other issue that's coming up, and that could impact their citizenship eligibility, because to become a citizen, you have to prove good moral character. And so they will look at over a 5-year look back period in most cases, whether or not there has been any arrest. And sometimes even an arrest could be an issue, even if it's, you're found not guilty or it's dropped, those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that you have covered all of that. And in some cases, it could be serious enough not only to affect their citizenship eligibility, but also to affect their green card or their permanent residence, because if you commit a serious enough offense, you can lose your permanent residence as well, and also be deported, even though you've previously been approved. So yeah, those things do come up. I won't say every day, but it's certainly something we always look for whenever we're working with clients.
You are watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can see JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is The Lawyer Show. I am your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. My co-counsel is Ann Badmus. The Lawyer Show is on. We go from 12 to 1 on Thursdays. There's an opinion, and I'm sure you're aware, Padilla versus Kentucky, which it's a big deal, obviously, in the criminal realm and the criminal defense practice, and so for our Sesame Street viewers at home, or in your office, or maybe even in your car, whatever you're doing. The way I've always explained to clients is when we kind of start running into immigration issues in the criminal context, is that I am like a foot doctor and the immigration attorney is like an ankle doctor, and sometimes you need both, right? But Padilla is a very interesting case, because what Padilla says, the U.S. Supreme Court basically says, as a criminal defense lawyer, I have what is characterized as a non-delegable duty to give immigration advice to my client. And so what that basically does is it kind of turns Jeremy, criminal defense lawyer Jeremy, it kind of turns me into some ways into an immigration lawyer. And so what will happen is, and a lot of times immigration, is the tail that wags the dog in a criminal case. There are many crimes, particularly in Collin County and in Denton County, where the vast majority of my practice is. We have a lot of people with professional licenses. We have a lot of people who have livelihoods like we're talking about. They're in the medical profession, they're in the IT profession, they're highly educated, but they may not be full U.S. citizens. They may be somewhere on the path to citizenship. They may have a green card. They may have been here as a student, have family here. And then all of a sudden, like we were talking about just a minute ago, Ann, somebody picks up a DWI or somebody gets arrested for possession of marijuana. And it can be extraordinarily tricky to navigate that. And in some instances, we just need a not guilty verdict. And so I'll tell you, one of the most just confounding types of cases that we see can be just simple possession of drugs and marijuana, for the reason that the state courts say anywhere, it's still a crime in Texas, by the way, at least for now. They're not charging it so much anymore, in Texas state law, between 0 ounces and 2 ounces are a misdemeanor. But the problem is that the federal immigration courts characterize it by the specific amount you have, am I right? And then they can kick that up to what they call a crime of moral turpitude, which can really, really hurt somebody immigration-wise. And Padilla, what the criminal defense lawyers, what we're worried about is what's called ineffective assistance of counsel. And so it is, which means that a conviction basically, or you've given bad advice, and such bad advice that the client is harmed by it, and basically the courts are coming back and saying this person had a right to a lawyer who knew what they were doing, and they didn't get that. And what happens in the criminal context as well is, again, for the viewers, I know you know all this stuff, Ann, and sometimes I just, like I said, I like to talk, and our one viewer knows that. But what happens, the ineffective, you see it very commonly. It is one of the most common tripwires for criminal defense lawyers. If somebody says, oh, it's okay to plead guilty to this, and then 6 months later it turns out immigration didn't like that, that's bad news for us. And we frequently we're in this situation where an immigration lawyer will call us and say, hey, Jeremy, we need you to turn back the clock. This guy pled guilty 10 years ago, and his lawyer never talked to him about immigration. And then we've got to go and try to dig that way. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts on all that? Have you seen, and Padilla, I don't know, is 10 years old maybe. Have you seen, what are your observations? I just did a whole bunch of talking, and you talk now, Ann.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So, what I've noticed, I mean, I think that we're seeing more and more criminal defense attorneys. Well, I think they feel they have to. I mean, I get contacted occasionally for, that kind of situation. Not necessarily someone who's not my client, but just someone, that they want advice in terms of how that would impact them. So I think, I mean, since Padilla's been around for some time, I think, you probably will say most criminal defense attorneys know when they see immigration, they need to probably reach out, because if it's not something you do every day in dealing with immigration law, you definitely want to reach out to someone who does have that expertise. And you're right, with immigration law, I mean, oftentimes what people will say is a misdemeanor would be considered an aggravated felony for immigration purposes. So, and even the, when you have the, gosh, it kind of slipped my mind, but basically where you have the probation, and then in 6 months it's supposed to be cleared off your record. I mean, that could still be considered a conviction for the purposes of immigration as well. So yeah, it's very, very important that criminal defense attorneys, if they're not also immigration attorneys, to reach out and to make sure that that's a consideration. I also noticed, I guess, since Padilla, I guess the courts, and I have just kind of visited some cases every once in a while just to see what's happening. But I do notice that the courts usually, if there is a plea, they usually have to agree that they understand the immigration consequences or something like that. Is that correct? I'm
Yes,
asking you the
yes.
question now.
Yeah,
But
no, you're
yeah,
right. No.
yeah,
In fact I went
exactly.
through one this morning, and yeah,
Uh-huh.
and so it doesn't matter, even if the judge will typically in a state court plea say, where were you born? And the person says, I was born in nowhere, Iowa, right? And the judge
Mhm,
still
mhm,
has to go through that admonition that, okay, even though you were born there, and that you still understand that. And I've seen that be an issue. Believe it or not, I've seen that be an issue, um, where I've seen situations where people thought they were born in one place and they really weren't. Not only that, I'll tell you this much too. I have been in the courthouse getting ready to go into a plea with my client, and I have no inkling at all that they are not American. There's no accent. There's really no indication. They just, this is just your average whatever accountant that works at whatever place 3 blocks over. Oh yeah, I was actually born in Switzerland, and I never did get my citizenship. I've been raised here since I was
mhm.
5. And then so it's like, oh my gosh, I'm glad we know that now. But we
Yeah.
do the best we can do to screen for it. We ask it in all our questionnaires, and yes, even in the most obvious of circumstances, you have to go over that part of it. And let me ask you a question here too,
Sure.
because I think that sometimes I worry that I am too. Um, I, I never need an excuse to take a case to trial. That's just what I do. I love to pull the trigger, and I love to be like, all right, we're gonna go, and we're gonna go have a jury. Sometimes, and I tell clients this too. I don't know what immigration law is going to say 10 years from 10 years from now about this. Yes, this may be fine
Mhm.
today. If we plead guilty, we've talked to an immigration lawyer, and I can tell you right now that if we plead guilty to this, it's not a problem today. I don't know who's going to be in the White House in 10 years,
Right.
right? And I don't
Mhm.
know what's going to happen. So, am I too paranoid?
Oh, no, I mean, yeah, yeah, we never know what's going to happen with immigration law. We don't even know, what Congress will do, certainly. And sometimes Congress, does make things retroactive, so you never can really know about that. So it's really important to be careful with that. Just as an aside, so Padilla, I just read that he's a citizen now. So he won his case and became a citizen.
All right,
So I thought that was really interesting.
take that, Kentucky, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about current events. Um, there is, within the last, I don't know how long, well, I read yesterday in the Dallas Morning News that there are a bunch of refugees, detainees. I don't know if I'm using the proper terminology. The paper called them detainees. It sounded a little
Mhm.
Al Qaeda to me, but whatever. There are a bunch of humans between the ages of, I think, 15, 16, 17 that are being housed now at the Dallas Convention Center. Talk a little bit about what's
Mhm.
going on with that crisis. Uh, I'll let you just kind of open the floor and just kind of let you talk about it.
Okay. Well, from what I understand with the border crisis, as we say, there's an influx of unaccompanied minors, and minors, of course, any under the age of 18 is still considered a minor. So that are coming from places like I believe is Honduras, El Salvador, not necessarily Mexico. So it's not really a
Mm-hmm.
Mexican nationals that are coming as people coming from Central America, essentially, and their claim is that they are really escaping, gang violence, concerns for their lives. So they are refugees in that sense. I mean, I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe there's a war or anything that we're thinking of, but more of just the conditions of those countries. So they are coming, making that trek through Mexico, coming to the border, and we know about the policies previously that they would be detained or even turned back or left in Mexico. But now the current policy is that they are allowing them to come into the U.S. to process and to be detained in the interior of the country, like Dallas, and to go through the process of proving their claim of, being eligible to stay here as a refugee. And oftentimes we think of refugees more, in terms from war-torn countries, that sort of thing. But in some cases, even for asylum, before the past administration, you could consider, gang violence and, those kinds of, not necessarily totally economic, but related to that kind of hostility, that you could consider that as an asylum claim or a refugee claim. So I think that's the kind of change that we're seeing. But the change that we're seeing is, instead of them being kept outside, maybe in Mexico at the border, being allowed in for those young children and being placed in these centers and hopefully processed as quickly as possible. Whether it's that they don't have a claim and they are returned back, or that they do have a claim and then they're placed in situations where they get legal status, and most of the time with their families, if they have families here in the U.S.
Yeah, so to break it down to as far as we can. So let's just take a random 15-year-old that's detained in the Dallas Center. What's going to happen to him? I think they're all boys. At least the ones.
Most of them are, yeah. The ones there
that we got. What will happen to him? What are the legal processes that he will likely go through, and what are the likely outcomes? And I know that there's all sorts of variables here, family, right, and that type of thing. Also, what's going on back home. But talk through what could happen with a specific individual.
Right. So this is basically what we call a removal process. Believe it or not, they're coming in, they're making their claim, and then they have to go through a process of going through the removal court, because they haven't come in with a legal status. They didn't get a visa at the U.S. Embassy. They didn't get permission to come here initially. So they are coming here to make their claim, and they usually go through what some people call deportation court, but it is a court process where they have to prove their case. Now, I'm not sure, and typically you don't, unlike criminal defense, you're not entitled to an attorney in most cases, and there usually isn't a public defender kind of situation. So you usually have to, if you're looking for help, either there's nonprofits or private attorneys that you can hire to help you through that process to prove your case. But while they're waiting for their cases to be heard, then they are either being detained here, but most of the time they're not going to want that to be a permanent process, because it can take quite a while to get to the court. There's no right to a speedy trial, unfortunately, in deportation. So it can take many years before they even get to the court proceeding. So they're usually, finding either nonprofits or family members who are in the United States to eventually, transition to those situations. So it can be quite a bit process. I know that typically we had this similar situation about 8 years ago under the Obama administration, where we had quite a few children coming on accompanied as well. They usually gave priority to these types of cases. So many of the people who are already in line for deportation court may even be delayed even farther, because they're trying to get through these younger people first. One other thing that the Biden administration is implementing, which was under the Obama administration but taken away under the Trump administration, was a process in those countries where instead of those young people making that dangerous journey to Mexico and trying to get to the border, they could actually apply within their countries for legal status to come into the U.S. So that is something that's being done now to hopefully avoid that many people trying to come through that dangerous journey to come here.
And so much of it, like we were talking about, so much of it is political, right?
Yes.
And so it's hard to avoid those situations, those debates, for the reason that you can't help but think that probably they probably look at President Biden as being more benevolent than Mr. Trump, who a lot of hard rhetoric, a lot of hard lines that were drawn. And so the argument on one side is, well, just by being nicer, you're inviting all this, right? But at the other point, I mean, what do you have to do to keep people from doing this? I mean, you can't obviously threaten to shoot everybody at the border, right? That's a little much and a touch on the anti-American side. That's not quite who we are. how do you see this resolving? How do you see where do you see this going? What do you think the administration is going to do, and to kind of resolve this and try to prevent these types of situations from happening? And is it realistic that folks will try to, like you were saying before, pre-register or apply remotely?
For benefits or to be able to come to the U.S. Yes. So, well, I will say, I mean, this is not a new problem. It's been going on for many, many, many years, and even under the Trump administration.
While we're at it, we can solve the Middle East peace stuff too. But yeah,
exactly.
So yeah, keep going.
We'll work on that next.
Yeah, for
yes, but
next episode,
right. Right, exactly. But yes, so even under the Trump administration, there were still people coming, regardless, because they're going to come, honestly. They will. But whether it's realistic in terms of, when that program was in place, there were people who applied. So it did happen. The numbers, I'm not sure of, and I'm not sure if everyone would be eligible, because it's not going to be it's not a program where, you just need to say this is, what's happening with you, and you're going to get permission to come. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things you have to do. So it's a lot of red tape, like any immigration process. And then, of course, there are people who are eligible for other types of visas that can do that. I think, overall, in terms of saying, how do we solve it? Because it's never going to be solved perfectly, but it's something that I think everybody is saying that there needs to be some congressional action to determine how to deal with this as a whole, as opposed to administration by administration. And so one of the things as immigration attorneys that we always said, and that we've always been hoping for and pushing for, is what we call comprehensive immigration reform, which not only thinks about what's happening at these border issues, or illegal immigration or legal status for people who are already here. I think there's about 11 million people already in the US without legal status. But we also need to think about how our system is more modernized, because it really hasn't changed, at least with the laws. Maybe since I've been practicing it, even before, there's really not been a change of, who do we want to come here? How do we want to integrate people into the US? How do we want to allow legal immigration? And should we look at industries that maybe need more workers, from other countries where perhaps we're not getting as many workers here that want to do that kind of work? How do we get that legal, route? Because the people that typically come without status, it's because they can't get it anyway. There's just no possible way for it to happen. So, maybe we need to really think about that. And that's something that Congress really has to do. It really just can't be done by any president or administration. It has to be done by Congress.
Okay. You're watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can watch JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is The Lawyer Show. We are on between noon and 1 on Thursdays. I'm your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal, co-counsel today, immigration lawyer Ann Badmus. So let's talk a little bit about your practice in particular. I'm curious to know, and again, you've already kind of answered this, which is and if I'm understanding you correctly, you feel like if there's legislative action and congressional action, that will be more stable than one administration after the next, after the next, after the next, just rewriting the rules through executive orders, which have their own issues with them as well. That's kind of sort of what you're thinking, 40,000?
Oh, yeah, I certainly agree. Yes, definitely.
What are you worried about these days? What types of where do you see the wind blowing? What changes do you think that we will see, and what are some of the changes that you think are going to affect your practice the most? Right, because it doesn't sound. I mean, you're obviously an expert on everything that's going on with a lot of these border crises, but you are working on business immigration. Is there anything that's going to affect that?
Yeah, so probably you might have heard that President Biden has sent a proposal to Congress for immigration reform. And Congress also has other bills that have been in place that just really haven't gone anywhere, but they've been there. So for my practice, or for those who are practicing in business or employment based, there are proposals there that we do hope will happen, but they're kind of bundled up with everything else. So politically, it's kind of hard to to pull those out. But one of the areas in particular is the legal immigration process for green cards through your employment. So as I mentioned before, I help clients with getting their green cards really based on their job. So even for doctors in particular, we have a lot of doctors from India. And those, the way it currently works is that if you're getting your green card through the employment process, there are different categories that they have, but the category that most people from India are in is either they're a bachelor's degree professional or they're a master's degree or higher professional. And because the system currently allocates only a certain number of green cards every year, and it's divided among all the countries in the world. So we have about 140,000 green cards available every fiscal year. And that's divided among the 100-some countries. Well, as you imagine, evenly among all those countries. So as you imagine, with India being a huge country, which has a lot of people wanting to immigrate, that causes a backlog or a waiting list. And in many cases, it's 10, 12 years, sometimes even longer. So even though the individuals have gone through the process of applying, have gotten their place in line, that line is increasing even longer and longer. So it's very frustrating for those clients who have been waiting for 10 years and they see other people from other countries who get it in 2 years simply because they're coming from smaller countries. So that is a real big issue that we've asked Congress to also address, however they can, but also to either even that process out in terms of length of time or increase those numbers and reallocate those numbers so that there isn't such a huge wait for people, or a long wait for people to actually get their green card. So that's one area that many advocates for these clients are really hoping that will change as well.
So if you were really qualified and you lived in India and you had a 10-year wait, the solution is just to immigrate to Liechtenstein first, right? Where the line is much shorter, then you get in, right?
Well, you know what? That doesn't help because it's place of birth.
Oh man!
So it doesn't matter.
I can't. I thought I'd figured something out here. Guess not.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Yeah, because that situation happens quite a bit. Yeah, we have quite a few that from India that immigrated to Canada. They're Canadian citizens, but it doesn't help them for that part of it, unfortunately.
Okay.
No.
Well, that's something. That's unfortunate. So the way your practice is structured is kind of unique because you run sort of a bigger shop, and you've actually come and gone from bigger firms and bigger groups back to being a solo. Talk about, from the business standpoint, talk about how that has worked, the pluses, the minuses, the pros and cons of doing that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, I had my own practice for about 20 years. And then at 20th anniversary of my practice, I decided to, or was recruited to a larger law firm to start up the immigration partner, to be a partner and start up the immigration practice. They did not have an immigration practice at that time. And so, I integrated my practice along with the attorneys that were working with me. We joined the practice and continued to grow the practice. It's very different, though, when you have been on your own than to go and now go back to kind of working. I mean, I was a partner, so it wasn't, a situation where I'm 100, that I was told what to do as far as the practice was concerned. But you do have to integrate with the administration and, of course, work together. And so it's not a problem. Sorry. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm having a problem here. Let me just fix something real quick. Can you hear us? I'm sorry.
Can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry. I'm having a problem here. Let me just fix something real quick. I'm sorry. Can you hear us? I'm sorry. I'm having a problem here. Let me just fix something real quick. I'm sorry. Yes, now I can hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I can
good.
hear you now.
Well,
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah,
I just
go
asked you
ahead.
the question of the century and you missed it. You got it wrong. No, I'm kidding. You
Yes,
couldn't
I
hear us.
missed it.
So,
Okay.
um,
But no, it's great to be back actually on my own. I really love practicing immigration law, and it's just great to be on my own again,
yeah, well, I
honestly.
would think. I mean, because when you are your own person, right? I mean, you're the only
Yes,
the buck stops with you. You make the decisions, right?
exactly.
Practice wise, and even not related to your cases. You're just talking about how much we're going to pay the person who's sitting up front, right? You go from that,
Right.
and as benevolent and as wonderful and as kind as another group is going to be, they're still going to. You're at less than 100% of the authority, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
Hmm.
has the pandemic? How has the pandemic affected immigration and immigration law? I of course
Hmm.
asked the most important and hardest hitting question with 3 minutes and 51 seconds left in our podcast here.
Right.
Um, but talk about how the pandemic and how COVID has affected the planet. There you go, and then we'll solve the Middle Eastern
Yes.
peace problems after this.
Great. Now that's a really good question. So I guess the thing I would say is it has caused great delays and frustration, of course, for those people who are waiting to get whatever their visa or status is concerned. So there were a lot of things that happened during the pandemic. Nothing really changed in terms of process or eligibility, those types of things. Well, I won't say process, but eligibility. So certainly anybody could still be qualified for, a visa if they're qualified. However, a lot of things stopped. So in the United States, the agency that typically handles immigration cases is the USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services under the Department of Homeland Security. So, of course, when we first had the pandemic, everything kind of slowed down, shut down almost in a way. Interviews could not happen. Uh, you know, Processing slowed down. People at the USCIS had to work at home as well. So those kinds of things really were frustrating for clients because it was already a slow process to begin with, but now it's even slower.
Hmm.
And then outside the country, people who are waiting to trying to get visas to come into the country, whether it's to visit or to go to school or to start a business, embassies shut down. And in fact, they're still only at half capacity at this point. So there's a lot of delays there. On top of that, there were some executive orders that basically prohibited any visa issuance at all. So in some cases, whether you qualify or not, you could not even, apply for a visa at the embassies. So all those things, some of those things have changed as far as those bans that I just mentioned,
Hmm.
but some things are still continuing. So there's a lot of delay that we're seeing, but we're hopeful that it's going to pick up soon as we start getting these vaccinations, and hopefully things will improve overall.
Right, and so international travel is obviously. Is there a new normal with immigration and travel and how people are getting to the U.S.? And I'm not talking again about the border, about our border, but as far as Europe or intercontinental
Yeah,
travel, is there a new
yeah,
normal there?
yeah. There is because and this ban is still going on, but many countries in Europe and Brazil and I think South Africa now have been banned from traveling to the U.S. unless you're a U.S. citizen, of course,
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to come on a visa, and you're not a U.S. citizen or have a green card here, then you are not allowed to come to the U.S. If you're still resident in Europe or and that also applies even if you have a layover, like if you're going to India and you stop over, are you coming from India and you stop over in England, you can't come to the US through that route, even if it's just for a few hours. Okay. So we have to advise clients if you're going to come, travel, make sure you don't go through Europe in order to get to the US.
Uh-huh.
But what some people are doing as far as Europeans are concerned who can come here, they will go to another country and stay for that 14-day period. So let's say they'll go to Mexico and they'll wait for 14 days, enjoy themselves in Mexico, and then be able to come into the United States. So it does require a little,
Mm-hmm.
maneuvering if you're trying to come to the US.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow. Sorry, I have the Benny Hill song on my timer for that's an hour for the
That's an
lawyer
hour.
show.
Yeah.
I had some really other great questions, and I feel like we were this close to solving all of it. Um,
Solving
we were
all
just
immigration problems.
everything, immigration, everything else. And uh, last question is, who is banning Americans from coming into their country? Is
I'm
there
sorry, I
anybody?
couldn't hear that part. Who's banning?
Are there any countries who are limiting travel from the U.S. to their country because of the pandemic?
Oh, going to another country. I
Hmm.
am not aware of any at this point. There may be, but honestly, I'm not aware of any. I have not heard that.
Okay,
Yeah, and
so
yeah,
we have to, one thing with Americans is we have to be able to have somebody to blame and to be like, well, you people will show you, and if they won't let us in, then maybe we'll just drive there, even if it's from like somewhere where it takes an ocean to get over. Um, I think
right.
I think JP, Kathy, and the Crew Nation has had enough of my shtick for a day. So I think that's going to do it today for the Lawyer Show. My guest today, Ann Badmus, immigration attorney extraordinaire. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you, Jeremy.